October 5, 2012. A date that will forever remain in the hearts of Nigerians. On this day, a horrific incident unfolded that left an entire nation grappling with the weight of grief, anger, and disbelief. In the small community of Aluu, near the University of Port Harcourt in Rivers State, 4 young students met a tragic, brutal end at the hands of a mob. They were falsely accused, beaten beyond recognition, and burned alive, all in broad daylight. This is the story of Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena, the Aluu 4, victims of one of the most harrowing cases of jungle justice in Nigerian history. These 4 young men were full of life and promise, the first sons of their parents, students at the University of Port Harcourt, each with dreams of a brighter future. But on that fateful day in October, their lives were cut short in the most horrific way imaginable. They were not criminals, they were not thieves, but the events that transpired in Aluu that morning and the mob's thirst for blood didn't care about the truth. So how did it all begin? According to reports, it was a simple debt collection gone wrong. Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena were owed money by a fellow student who lived in Aluu. In the early hours of that morning, they made their way to the debtor's house, hoping to collect what was due. When their debtor refused to pay, heated arguments ensued. In frustration, they decided to seize some of his belongings as collateral with the intention of forcing him to settle the debts later. But what happened next would seal their fate. The debtor, instead of negotiating, raised a false alarm, shouting that the boys were thieves who had broken into his home to steal. His cries echoed through the still morning air, catching the attention of the local vigilante group and nearby residents. In a flash, people gathered, fueled by fear, anger, and the belief that they were dealing with criminals. The mob didn't ask questions, they acted. The boys, sensing danger, ran for their lives, but it was too late. The mob had grown and soon they were surrounded. Caught in the grips of chaos, the boys had no chance to explain themselves, no opportunity to plead their innocence. The vigilante group and enraged community members took matters into their own hands without evidence, without due process, and without questions and without mercy. What makes this story even more tragic is the ease with which a crowd gathered, ready to witness the unfolding horror. There had been a recent rise in thefts in the community and tensions were high. The people of Aluu, already frustrated by the perceived lack of insecurity, were quick to brand the 4 students as culprits. This was jungle justice in its raw, unfiltered form, the act of people taking the law into their own hands with devastating consequences. In no time, the boys were stripped naked. Their clothes were torn from their bodies, their dignity snatched from them as the mob paraded them through the streets. It was a scene reminiscent of medieval punishment, but it was 2012. This was 2012, in a supposedly civilized society. With each punch, each kick, each strike of a plank, the mob grew more frenzied. Thousands gathered to watch the lynching. Some filmed it, others cheered it on, while a few, perhaps in disbelief, stood by in stunned silence, unsure of how to intervene. These boys had no voice in this crowd. Their cries for mercy were drowned out by the jeers and the noise. They were not judged by any court of law. Instead, they were subjected to a mob's version of justice, swift, brutal, and irrevocable. At this point, the boys were barely recognizable. Their bodies, now broken and battered, could no longer sustain them. They were too weak to stand, too beaten to speak. But the mob wasn't done. They wanted more. And in their collective rage, they took the ultimate step. They set the boys on fire. The flames engulfed them, consuming not just their bodies, but also any hope of survival. The entire community stood and watched as these young men were burned alive with their families far away, who had no idea that their sons were being taken from them in such a brutal manner. As the news spread, it wasn't just Nigeria that was horrified. The world watched in disbelief as the videos of the lynching surfaced online, exposing the ugly reality of mob justice that continues to plague many parts of the world. The outcry was deafening, but for Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena, it was too late. The Aluu 4 became a symbol, a painful reminder of the dangers of mob justice. In the days following the lynching, Nigerians flooded the streets and social media platforms demanding justice for these boys. And while the legal process was slow, it did eventually come. The police arrested several people in connection with the crime, including members of the local vigilante group and a police officer who had been present at the scene but did nothing to stop the mob. Nearly 5 years later, on July 31st, 2017, justice was finally served, though it came far too late for the families of the victims. The Rivers State High Court sentenced 3 men to death for their involvement in the murder: Police Sergeant Lucky Oji, David Chinas Ogbada, and Ikechukwu Louis Amadi, also known as Capone. These individuals were found to have played an active role in the death of the Aluu 4, and the court ruling brought some semblance of closure to the grieving nation. But for the families of Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena, the scars will never fully heal. Their sons have been taken from them at the prime of their youth. And you know what makes it even more annoying? Their sons were taken from them in the most brutal, inhuman way imaginable. No amount of justice can bring them back. For their mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters, the pain of that loss remains as raw today as it was on that fateful day in 2012. Every year on the anniversary of their death, Nigerians remember the Aluu 4. Candlelight vigils are held in their memory, and their stories retold to remind us all of the importance of law and justice and the dangers of allowing fear, anger, and misinformation lead us down a path of violence. But what have we learned? Has Nigeria moved on from this culture of mob justice? Sadly, incidents like these continue to happen across the country. From accusations of witchcraft to theft, countless individuals have been subjected to jungle justice, often with no evidence and no trial. The Aluu 4 should have been a wake-up call. Yet, the question remains, has enough been done to prevent this from happening again? The University of Port Harcourt lost 4 bright young students that day. 4. Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena. They were more than just names. They were young men with hopes, dreams, and futures. Futures that were stolen from them by a society that failed to protect them. The story of the Aluu 4 is a heartbreaking reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of justice. It's a call to action for all of us, to stand up against the culture of jungle justice and to demand better from our communities and our leaders. Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena. These were more than just names in the headlines. They were sons, brothers, and friends. Their lives mattered, and their deaths left an irreplaceable void in the hearts of their families and the Nigerian community. At the University of Port Harcourt, the memory of the Aluu 4 lives on. But the question that lingers is how many more must suffer before society rejects this form of vigilante justice once and for all? In the years since their deaths, many have continued to call for stronger laws and better policing to prevent incidents like this from happening again. But time and again, this incident has reoccurred. This is not just about these 4 young men. Their story has become a symbol of the need for reform in Nigeria's justice system, which is long overdue. There must be accountability for those who choose to bypass the rule of law. Communities must be educated about the dangers of mob mentality, and law enforcement needs to be more present and effective in protecting citizens, even from their own neighbors. Unfortunately, jungle justice is not an isolated issue. Across Nigeria, from the bustling streets of Lagos to the rural communities, countless others have fallen victims to mob actions. Innocent people accused of theft, witchcraft, or petty crimes have faced the same brutal end as Ugonna, Lloyd, Chiadika, and Tekena. How many more lives must be lost before we collectively say enough is enough? The legal system must step up. While the conviction of the men involved in the Aluu 4 lynching was a step in the right direction, it took nearly 5 years for justice to be served. Justice delayed is justice denied. Swift and fair trials must become the norm, not the exception. Every October on the anniversary of their tragic deaths, let us not only remember the Aluu 4, but also reflect on what we can do as individuals, as a community, and as a nation to ensure that such an atrocity never happens again. It's not enough to be outraged. We must demand change. Change for ourselves and for our immediate communities. Ugonna, Lloyd, Chadika, and Tekena, they are gone, but never forgotten. They are forever in the hearts of many Nigerians and their families. Their story must be a catalyst for change, for if we do not learn from this tragedy, we risk repeating it. Continue to rest in peace, Aluu. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect, if it made you question how we as a society handle justice, then share it. Speak up against jungle justice, and remember, we are all responsible for protecting the lives of the innocent. Thank you.